Okay, folks, welcome to another session of PHI 240. Today, we're going to be continuing our discussion of feminism and feminist ethics. Uh, so, last time we looked at Hilda Lindemann's essay on feminist ethics. Today, we're going to be looking at more of an overview of feminism and feminist ethics. As Shafer-Landau writes about it in our textbook. For this video, we're going to break things into two. So I'm going to stop partway through, and then we'll continue with a second video, just to keep it short, keep it broken up, just so you don't have to listen to me talk for such long stretches of time. So, here's a question that we might ask at the outset. Are women treated fairly? Here's just like one little study that might get you going on the question of why some people think that we need feminism, why we need to engage in this process of critiquing gender norms. So, this is something I read about in a book called All the Rage, Mothers, Fathers, and the Myth of Equal Partnership by Darcy Lockman, who is trained as a journalist and as a psychologist. So Lockman looked at a study on how household chores are divided within families. And in heterosexual couples, where partners both agreed that housework and childcare was being shared fairly, not fared sharely, shared fairly. What percent of the work was done by women? So we can imagine, it might be like a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split, something like that. And remember, these couples said that they thought that their arrangement was a fair one. Well, through the study, they found that 65% of the work was done by the women in these couples. So that's basically twice as much housework for women. If it was 66-33, then at that point we'd have 2-1. So this is just 1% off from 2-1. Now, it might be that in some of these couples, they make a conscious decision to give more work to the mothers, and they find that fair. But in a lot of cases, we see that maybe the way we think about gender sort of treats the work of some women as invisible in ways that is rather unfair to them. So I think that we can take this case as yet another instance of how feminists might see things in the world that indicate to them that gender norms are often very fair, and we might even say oppressive towards women. So I'll post on Moodle this link to this study by Darcy Lockman that she refers to in an interview. Okay, so just want to review a few important points from last time from Lindemann's essay. So Lindemann did point out that feminism means different things to different people. There are different ways of doing feminism, and not all feminists agree on every single point. One of the big distinctions that Lindemann finds important is the distinction between sex versus gender. So whereas sex can reasonably be thought of as a biological concept, a concept involving what kind of chromosomes you have, whether you have a penis or a vagina. Those are biological concepts. But gender isn't a biological fact. It's more like a set of norms. Uh, so it's, for instance, the norm that men are supposed to be tough, or that women are supposed to take care of childcare responsibilities in a more predominant way. Uh, so the idea here is gender is sort of like a series of social norms that tells people how they should act according to gender. One of the interesting points that Lindemann pointed out is while there are, in fact, gray areas when it comes to sex in biology, so there are intersex people, there are people with XY chromosomes who have vaginas and give birth because they're not receptive to certain hormones. Gender norms don't allow for these in-between cases and don't accommodate the spectrum of different sexual categories that actually exist. And Lindemann also pointed out that we should focus on differences in power based in gender. So we want to think about how there are certain unjust authority relationships in the way that gender roles are set up. So she sees both a descriptive project and a normative project in doing feminism. So the descriptive project in feminist philosophy is all about describing how power and norms affect both men and women. So we can start asking questions about, like, what effect does it have on men that they're expected to be tough and independent? One study says that it ends up like costing men a lot of time in their life because they feel ashamed to ask for directions, it's been said. But of course, we can also think about how maybe this is the reason why women tend to do more housework than men. So we might think about how gender norms actually have an effect on people psychologically and sociologically. There's also this normative project, right? So the normative project is about recommending or prescribing a different way of setting up society, trying to paint a picture of how it would be a better thing to take women's moral experiences as important and treating them with respect, those experiences. So those are some important points that came out from the Lindemann reading last time. So here are a couple of other things we might say about feminist ethics that come out in the Shafer-Landau reading. One point is that the most prominent authors and supporters of the ethical theories that we've considered so far have some things in common. So when we're thinking about the theories we've looked at so far, we've thought about utilitarianism, Kantianism, virtue ethics, ethical intuitionism, or the theory of prima facie duties that Ross favored. All these theories are written by men. And these men who wrote these theories, they lived in patriarchal societies that had antiquated views about women. Insofar as it was a different time back then, those different times were not as responsive or sensitive to a lot of the issues related to women's equality that we feel are important nowadays. So there are certain ways in which, because of these patriarchal societies, these philosophers have shortchanged the lives of women. So part of it is that they've made a lot of false and damaging claims about women. So for instance, Kant claimed that women were not capable of acting according to principles in the way that men were. So in effect, because Kant thought that acting on principles was such an important thing, he basically was denying that women were capable of genuine moral agency and doing actions with genuine moral worth. But moreover, uh, many philosophers have done a bad job of paying attention to women's experiences and perspectives. Uh, so, in many cases, the specific things that women go through were considered to be trivialities rather than important considerations that we might take seriously uh, when we do our ethical theorizing. Again, this came up in our Zoom meeting that issues like childbirth or women's experience at work with sexual harassment, these kinds of issues are not things that a lot of our classic traditional philosophers have paid much attention to. And it's only through doing feminist ethics that um, issues related to childbirth, childcare, sexual harassment at work have gotten much of any play in ethical theorizing. So here are just four central ideas that seem to be predominant in feminist ethics. Uh, One is just the point that women are the moral equals of men. And within that context, views that justify subordination of women or that downplay the interests of women are mistaken on that very account. So, insofar as we take the moral concerns of men seriously, feminist ethics just wants to make sure that views that are used to justify subordination can't be right. And second, we were just discussing this, the experiences of women deserve our respect and are vital to a full and accurate understanding of morality. So it's the idea that women, with their experiences, have something unique and important to understand to the way we think about what it is to live well and what it is to do the right thing. Theories that ignore women's experience are going to be inaccurate and incomplete and biased. Third, you might say that traits that have been traditionally associated with women, things like empathy, sympathy, caring, altruism, mercy, and compassion, are at least as morally important as traditionally masculine traits, such as competitiveness, independence, demanding a fair share, readiness to resort to violence, and the insistence on personal honor. So the thought here is that there are certain traits that are traditionally associated with women and some traits that are traditionally associated with men. And many feminist ethics have pointed out that insofar as a lot of traits get associated with women, they tend to be denigrated. So, for instance, Kant claimed that empathy wasn't worth as much as things like impartiality and principledness. So, a big part here in feminist ethics is an insistence on changing the emphasis of what we think about as morally important. So we might also say that, like, not only traits that might be considered virtues, but also methods of moral reasoning. There might be ways of moral reasoning that are traditionally associated with women, and which ought to be taken more seriously. So we might think about things like cooperation, flexibility, openness to competing ideas, and connectedness to family and friends. That these are, in many cases, even superior to what we might think of as traditionally masculine ways of reasoning, where we're dealing with things like impartiality, abstraction, and strict adherence to rules. So, our two absolutist moral theories, utilitarianism and Kantianism, basically wanted to explain every single moral belief insofar as they are true in terms of a single principle, right? According to utilitarians, according to the principle of utility, according to Kantians, according to the categorical imperative. So the thought here is that that's kind of like a dude's way of thinking, right? And insofar as women solve moral problems and questions differently by focusing on cooperation and flexibility, for instance, we might think that they have perhaps a superior method that we might learn a lot from. So I'm going to wrap up part 1 there, and we will pick up in just a moment by thinking about one particular version of feminist ethics, which was developed by Carol Gilligan. And Gilligan's theory is sometimes called the ethics of care. So we're going to pick up on that specific version of feminist ethics in the next video. So thanks for watching this one. Be well, and before you watch that next one, get up and stretch. Try to move around a bit. When we're all in this quarantine together or separate from each other, it's important to look after yourself and not only stare at the computer screen. So get up, have a good stretch, and we will see you back in a little bit. All right, take care.